It sounds like some really interesting conversations going on. I can't wait to hear the answers. So I'm going to be out in the lobby after the service, and I hope that as you grab a cupcake that you'll let me know who your person was as well. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Yes. The people online are paying attention now. The people in the room, not so much. I can't wait. I can't wait to hear who the most famous person was that you met. I'm going to share mine in a couple of minutes. But before that, I just wanted to acknowledge this anniversary. So this is Hope's 33rd anniversary, which is very cool. Yay. It was November 18th, 1990. And if you are here in this room online and you were at that first service, I want to say a personal word of thanks to you for your commitment and your faithfulness to this church over those 33 years. And if you came sometime later, whether it was weeks later, months later, years later, decades later, this is your first time. I want to say I am so glad that you found your way to Hope Church and that you are now a part of this wonderful adventure called Hope that we are on together. So I'm so thrilled that you're here. You know, one of the things that I hear often about my time is, you know, how unusual it is for someone to pastor the same church for as long as I have. And I acknowledge that. That is pretty unusual. But I also tell folks that it feels like it's been different churches over those years. And there's been eras within this church's life. I used to say there were 3 eras. I now say that there are 4 different eras that kind of mark this church. And I want to just describe the 4 real briefly and some things about those eras. And so the first era is what I would call church with no home. So, and that was 9 years. For 9 years, we were having our worship services, our Sunday morning things in schools. First at the elementary school, then at the high school. And everything else that we did, we were in rented or borrowed facilities, whether it was fire halls or community buildings or office buildings or homes. Everything else happened in those kinds of places, similar to what our Mount Laurel experience was years later. During that time, some of the touchstones, some of the things that made that congregation or were going on in that congregation, creative invitation. Because we were brand new, nobody heard of us or knew us, and we didn't have a building, we had to be really creative in the ways that we invited people to come to the church. During that time, we had to learn what it meant to make disciples. We believed that, even all the way back then, we believed that the primary job of the church is to make disciples because that's what Jesus told us. But we had to figure out what does that look like for a large group of people who were either new to the faith or seeking faith or had left the faith and now are coming back. What does it look like to disciple people in those early years? And another part of that era was adapting to challenges and seeing God in them. When you're renting facilities, borrowing facilities, you're always at the mercy of the people who own the place. And so, for example, there were a lot of Sundays over those 9 years where we would show up and the building was locked. No custodian around, and man, we had to get really creative in adapting to that reality, but always seeing God's hand in the midst of that. The second era is what I would call the building and adjustment era, and that was about 7 years. During that era, we were in the process of building this facility and the addition that came a few years later. And so during those eras, we were asking people to deepen their commitment to the church. So we were asking them to give more time in volunteering and to be financially generous because we had to raise the money to be able to build these facilities. We were also embracing different during that time. So, when we were in schools, everybody, understood that the church was going to be different than the traditional church because we didn't have a building. But then as we began to talk about the building and designs for the building and so forth, everybody kind of had in their own head what the building would look like, and I can guarantee you nobody had in their head what we ended up with, right? That doesn't look like a church to anybody. And what we were saying in that time was that the things that make us different aren't going to change because we're going to be in a building. We don't want a building that's going to redefine us. We want a building that's going to reflect who we are in ministry. And so that was an interesting time in the life of this church. The third era is what I would call the era of wider and deeper. Our influence in the region was growing wider. Now that we have a building and we've been around for years, and this era was about 13 years long. So people are now aware of us, other churches and church leaders, and so they were curious and coming to learn about what we do and how we do it and why we do it and so forth. So we were having a wider influence. We were expanding our ministry, so we were widening the ministries, and they were getting deeper as well. So in that era, we added a preschool. Our children's ministry was expanding. Our youth ministry was expanding. We made a deeper commitment to small groups as core to who we are as a congregation. And so all of that was going on. And we saw maturing, a deeper faith, a maturing faith in Christ in people across the church, and a maturing in our leadership. Now with buildings and growing membership and growing attendance and growing ministries and all of that stuff, leadership needed to mature as well. The fourth era is what I'm calling the pandemic era. All right, and that began in March of 2020, and we're still in it. Not still in a pandemic, but we're still in that era of ministry. And some of the things that are marking this era, I would say, are clarifying the essentials of the faith, the essentials versus the non-essentials. A non-essential doesn't mean unimportant, it just means it's not foundational to our faith in Jesus. So we've been, in this era, being as clear as possible about what are those things that are essential and we need to be unified around, and those things that are non-essential that we can have a diversity of views about. So we've been having to clarify that in this era. In this era, I think we have been experiencing unity without proximity. Unity without proximity. Because we were all apart, and we used to say when we were in kind of the lockdown thing, together while apart. We're together while being apart. And so that whole idea of being of unity without proximity has been a marker, I think, of this era. Another is responding to the new realities in ways that are consistent with our faith, without compromising our faith. So we are living in a changing time, as you know. Our culture has been changing. Things around the world have been changing. It's been a really challenging time of changes and trying to navigate through what are those things that we are committed to that are unchanging in a changing culture. And kind of along those same lines, this congregation over this pandemic era, I would say that we have been rejecting divisive and angry rhetoric and focused on God's radical grace. That as a congregation, we refuse to get into the angry rhetoric that is gone on in our culture and in our politics and all of that kind of thing. And we have been committed to and focused on and talking about and living into God's radical grace. So, like I said, I don't know. We're in that era. I don't know how long this era is going to be, but I suspect that it's going to be a new era in the life of this church sooner than later. That's my guess. So, speaking of eras, let me tell you about the most famous person I've ever met. And for those of you who are plugged into the culture, you already know, based on that probably, who I'm talking about. For you who live off the grid, I guess, I don't know how you wouldn't hear of this person, but I met Taylor Swift. What? Yeah, me and Tay-Tay are tight. Yeah, it's true. For those of you who don't know, she's in this world tour right now that is called Eras. And so I met Taylor Woods. And just like the story about the World Series that Pastor Rick told a couple of weeks ago, and then the story about Tiger Woods I told last week, this story involves Pastor Rick as well. He and I met Taylor together. I was thinking, we're sort of like the pastor version of Forrest Gump. So it's a longer story, but I'll just tell the really condensed version. Members here, John and Mary, have known the Swifts since Taylor was a little girl. And so back in 2011, Pastor Rick and John and I were going to a conference in Chicago. And so we got our rent-a-car from the airport, and we were driving to the town where the conference was going to be. And we drove by this arena, and out on the marquee was a sign that said, Taylor Swift concert tonight. And I was like, that's cool. So John called Scott, Taylor's dad, and just said, hey, we're in Chicago. We just saw that Taylor's doing a concert. That's kind of cool. And Scott said, I'm there. I'm actually at the concert tonight. You ought to come. And we're like, what? Taylor Swift concert? 3 middle-aged guys? Is that even legal? So I'm like, all right. So we drop our stuff off at the hotel, turn around, drive back to this arena. He told us to meet at the service entrance of the arena, and so he's there with these passes for us. And we go in the service entrance, and we're winding through these darkened corridors through the bowels of this arena, and then walk through this opening onto the floor of the arena, where we are immediately overwhelmed by the sheer volume of 19,000 screaming girls. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but it is overwhelming. It was overwhelming. So we go, and he takes us to the center of the floor where the tech booth is. And so we're standing at the tech booth and experiencing this amazing concert that Taylor is doing. And as the concert's winding down, Scott signals for us, and we follow him. We go toward the front of the arena, along the side of the stage, and then back behind the stage into the staging area. So it's this big wide open area, and it's people back there who help with the props and background singers. I don't know who they all were, but a bunch of people back there. And so we stood around for about 15 minutes, and then Taylor came out. And at that point, she's 18 or 19 years old, and she was excited to see Uncle John, and really excited to see Pastor Jeff and Pastor Rick. And then afterwards, Scott said, hey, follow me, and he took us out in the parking lot, and we got onto Taylor's bus. So, I guess I'm a pretty big deal. And I'm sure Taylor talks about that all the time. So she's amazing, right? She has become this phenom. Unbelievable. She no longer fills arenas, she fills stadiums around the country and around the world. When she was in Philadelphia back in May, she filled the Link 3 nights in a row. And there were thousands and thousands of fans in the parking lot. It's unbelievable. What is it about this artist that draws people in this way? And you can Google that, and there's lots of theories about why she is so popular. Here's my sense of it. Her songs speak to the hearts and the minds and the experience, particularly of women and girls, in a profound way. And so when she's in concert, they want to go, and all of these people who have these songs now memorized because they speak to their hearts, minds, and experience. And they come into these arenas and into these stadiums with thousands of others who have similar kind of experience. And their attention is on the one who produced all of that. And they have this joyful experience together that we would call worship, right? Worship. We worship God because God is worthy of our worship. We don't worship just because it's an obligation, and we don't worship just with our intellect or just with our emotions. We bring all of who we are, our minds, our hearts, and our experiences. We bring all of who we are, and we come together with others who are having the same experiences, influenced by the truths of God and the work of the Holy Spirit. And we come together weekly with our minds and our hearts and our experiences and worship the one true God. So I want to take a few moments that we have left. And I want to listen to David's description of worship of God. It's the 100th Psalm, and it'll be in the Message version, which just gives it a different flavor, a different slant to it. And I want to go through, and I just want to touch on some things that we learn about worship through this brief psalm. Okay? So here's how it starts. It says, "On your feet now, applaud God." On your feet now, applaud. No, I'm not. Yeah. Go ahead and applaud God. If you're home, applaud God, right? That was sort of like a golf applause. Yeah. It was very nice. Very nice. All right, we'll cycle back to that. You're not getting away with that. Bring a gift of laughter. Sing yourselves into his presence. Laughter. Songs. This is the emotion, this is the heart that we bring as we come before God. You know, people say that worship is a serious thing, right? Worship is a serious thing. And that's true. Worship is serious. But serious is not the same thing as somber or sanctimonious, right? Parenting is serious. But if you never laugh or sing with your children, you're missing an important part of the relationship. So what we do here is serious, but it is also joy-filled. And so there are definitely times of laughter and singing and the expression of joy when we come together in worship. Know this, he goes on to write, know this, God is God and God, God. He made us. We didn't make him. Okay? Now this is the intellect, right? Know this. This is the mind, right? Understand this. And then the way that the Message puts it is a little convoluted. God, 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 right? What does that mean? If you look at a more traditional translation, it says, know that the Lord is God. In the Hebrew, it is Yahweh is Elohim. And really what David is saying there is, even though we have these different words, and we sang some of them just a moment ago, right? Rapha, right? Jehovah. These different names, it is the same God. There aren't many gods. There is one God, and it's the God that we worship. It's the God who made us. We don't invent God. We don't get to say what God is and how God is. God tells us, reveals himself. And he reveals himself most fully to us in the person of Jesus, God in human flesh. But there is one God, and that's who we worship. He goes on, we're his people, his well-tended sheep. Enter with the password, thank you. Right? So God didn't just create us, God cares for us. God leads us as sheep are led by a shepherd, right? And then this idea of the password. When we gather together for worship, one of the singular ideas in every worship service is that we are coming together to say to God, thank you. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for giving us life. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for revealing yourself to us. Thank you for grace. Thank you for guidance. Thank you for strength. All the things of life that we need, we gather together to corporately express our gratitude toward God. Then it ends this way. Make yourselves at home, talking praise. Thank him, worship him, for God is sheer beauty, all generous in love, loyal always and ever. So worship, both private and public, is central to our relationship with God. What we have always said here at Hope is that worship is at the center of everything we do. It's the heart. And we use that illustration of the heart, right? So the heart pumps blood out into the rest of the body to feed and nurture the body. And then it circulates back around into the heart to be cleansed and to receive the nutrients that the body needs, and then it goes back out. That's worship. We gather together on these weekly occasions, these Sundays, to be nurtured, to get the nutrients that we need to go back out into life, to go back out to serve, to go out and invite, to go out and grow, to go out and give ourselves to others. And then we come back to be nurtured again, to get those nutrients that we need, those spiritual nutrients that we need in order to do life well. So every era in this church over 33 years has been different and has required different things of us in those eras. But one thing that has been consistent all along has been worship. At the very beginning, the first thing that we did as a congregation on November 18th, 1990, was gather for worship. And we have been doing that ever since. Even throughout the pandemic, we continued to gather together to be nurtured by God and to offer Him our praise and our thanks. So, here's how the psalm began. On your feet, applaud God. That wasn't, yeah. So get on your feet. Get on your feet. If you're online, get on your feet. Not a golf applaud. Let's hear it for God. Woo-hoo! All right.